I thought I was just installing a home security system for another lonely suburban client. But when Ruby Martinez caught me staring and asked if she still had it at 50, what she did next changed everything I thought I knew about beauty, confidence, and what it really means to feel alive. Little did I know that those 5 words would lead to the most unexpected week of my 34-year-old life. My name is Joaquin Parker, and if you'd asked me 6 months ago to describe my life, I would have used words like predictable, steady, and safe. I've been running Parker Security Solutions for 8 years now, installing alarm systems, cameras, and smart locks for middle-class families across Riverside County. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It's honest work, pays the bills, and keeps me busy enough that I don't have to think too hard about the fact that my personal life is about as exciting as watching paint dry. Most days blend together in a comfortable routine. Wake up at 6:30, coffee in a protein bar, load the van with equipment, drive to whatever subdivision needs my services that day. I've seen the inside of probably 3,000 homes by now, from cramped starter houses where young couples argue about sensor placement, to sprawling McMansions where trophy wives want cameras hidden so their husbands don't know they're watching the pool boy. The job has its perks. I'm my own boss. I work with my hands. And there's something satisfying about leaving a family's home more secure than when I found it. But if I'm being honest, somewhere along the way, I stopped really seeing the people I worked for. They became background noise to the technical challenges of running wire through walls and programming control panels. That Tuesday morning in late September started like any other. I was sitting in my van outside a Starbucks, reviewing the day's work orders while nursing my second cup of coffee. 3 installations scheduled: a young family on Maple Street worried about break-ins, an elderly couple on Pine who wanted cameras to watch for package thieves, and a final appointment on Sycamore Drive for someone named Ruby Martinez, who'd requested a comprehensive system upgrade. The Martinez job was interesting from a technical standpoint. The work order mentioned a large property, existing system that needed modernization, and a customer willing to pay for top-of-the-line equipment. These were the jobs I actually enjoyed. Complex installations that required real problem-solving rather than just mounting a couple of cameras and calling it a day. I'd been doing this long enough to make assumptions about clients based on their addresses and requests. Sycamore Drive was in one of the nicer neighborhoods. Older homes with character, established trees, the kind of place where people drove luxury cars but weren't flashy about it. Ruby Martinez, I figured, was probably a divorced executive or maybe a widow with money to spend on peace of mind. I'd meet her, assess her needs, quote the job, and hopefully wrap up installation within 2 days. The drive to Sycamore took me through the part of town where I'd grown up, past the high school where I'd played varsity soccer and dated Sarah Chen before she left for college and never looked back. These days, this neighborhood felt like a museum of my younger self's ambitions. The dreams I'd had before life convinced me that steady and predictable were better than risky and passionate. I'd been single for 2 years now, ever since my last serious relationship ended when Jessica decided she needed someone with bigger dreams. The irony wasn't lost on me that I spent my days making other people's homes feel safer, while my own life felt like it was standing still. The house at 847 Sycamore Drive surprised me. Instead of the typical Spanish colonial or craftsman bungalow I found myself looking at a mid-century modern masterpiece. Clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, a flat roof that shouldn't have worked in this neighborhood but somehow did. The landscaping was immaculate. Not the manicured perfection of hired gardeners, but the thoughtful composition of someone who actually understood plants. I parked in the circular driveway, grabbed my tablet and measuring tape, and walked toward the front entrance. The house felt alive in a way that many of the places I visited didn't. Music drifted from somewhere inside, not the background noise of television or radio, but what sounded like someone actually playing piano. Jazz, maybe? Something with a complex melody that made me pause on the doorstep. Before I could ring the bell, the door opened. That's when I first saw Ruby Martinez, and I understood immediately that every assumption I'd made about this job was wrong. She was tall, maybe 5'7", with the kind of posture that suggested dance training or yoga discipline. Her dark hair was pulled back in a way that looked effortless but probably took thought, and she wore a flowing turquoise top over well-fitted jeans. But it was her eyes that caught me off guard. Dark brown, direct, and holding just enough amusement to suggest she'd been watching me stand there like an idiot for longer than I realized. "You must be Joaquin," she said, extending a hand with a firm grip and a smile that made something in my chest do an unexpected flip. "I'm Ruby. Thank you for fitting me into your schedule on such short notice." Her voice had that quality that some women develop in their 40s and 50s. Confident, warm, completely without the need to impress anyone. She was beautiful, obviously. But it was more than that. She carried herself like someone who had figured out who she was and was comfortable with the answer. "No problem at all," I managed, hoping my voice sounded more professional than I felt. "I understand you're looking to upgrade your security system?" "Among other things," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "Come in, let me show you around. Fair warning, this might be more complicated than your typical installation." As I followed her into the house, I had no idea how right she was, or that within the hour she'd catch me staring and ask a question that would turn my perfectly ordinary Tuesday into something I'd never forget. Walking into Ruby's house was like stepping into a different world. The interior matched the exterior's mid-century aesthetic, but with a warmth that felt lived in rather than designed. Natural. Light poured through those floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating hardwood floors that had been worn smooth by decades of life. Art covered the walls. Not the generic landscapes you see in most homes, but original pieces that suggested someone with actual taste and stories behind each acquisition. "This is incredible," I said, stopping in the main living area where a baby grand piano sat near the windows. Sheet music was scattered across the bench, and I could see pencil markings where someone had been working through a complicated passage. "You play?" "Guilty as charged," Ruby said with a laugh. "I was a music teacher for 23 years before I retired. These days I play mostly for myself, though I still give lessons to a few neighborhood kids who can tolerate my perfectionist tendencies." She led me through the house, pointing out areas where she wanted cameras installed, explaining her concerns about the sliding glass doors that opened to the backyard, discussing the smart home integration she hoped to achieve. But I found myself only half listening to the technical requirements. There was something magnetic about the way she moved through her space, touching things with casual familiarity, pointing out features with genuine pride rather than showing off. "The current system is at least 15 years old," she was saying. As we examined the existing control panel in her kitchen, half the sensors don't work anymore, and the monitoring company keeps calling about equipment that stopped communicating with their central station sometime during the Obama administration. I was supposed to be taking notes, measuring walls, calculating equipment needs. Instead, I kept getting distracted by details that had nothing to do with security systems. The way she'd organized her spice rack by color rather than alphabetically. A collection of vintage cameras displayed on floating shelves. Books everywhere. Not just decorative spines, but clearly read volumes with bookmarks and marginalia. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "You're not really listening to me, are you?" Ruby said suddenly, and I looked up to find her watching me with an amused expression. "Sorry. I gestured vaguely at the room around us. "Your house is fascinating. Most of the places I work are so generic, you know? This feels like someone actually lives here." "Someone definitely lives here," she said. "Sometimes too much, according to my sister Joan. She thinks I should downsize to a condo, get rid of all this clutter, as she calls it. Make my life more manageable." "That would be a crime," I said without thinking, then immediately felt my face warm. I mean, from a professional standpoint, houses like this, with character and history, they're rare. Ruby studied me for a moment, her head tilted slightly. "How long have you been doing this work, Joaquin?" 8 years, officially. But I've been working with electronics since I was a teenager. My dad was an electrician, and I grew up helping him run wire and troubleshoot systems. "And do you enjoy it?" The question caught me off guard. Most clients asked about my experience, my certifications, my availability. No one had ever asked if I enjoyed the work. Yes, I do. Most of the time. It's problem solving, you know? Every house presents different challenges, different puzzles to solve. But Ruby prompted, sensing there was more. I found myself being more honest than I'd intended. But sometimes, I feel like I'm installing systems to help people hide from the world instead of engaging with it. All these cameras and sensors, trying to control every variable, keep every threat at bay. It makes people feel safer, but I'm not sure it makes them feel more alive. Ruby nodded slowly. That's a surprisingly philosophical take for a security installer. Sorry, I don't usually... I started to backtrack, but she held up a hand. Don't apologize. I like that you think about the deeper implications of your work. Most service people just want to complete the job and move on to the next one. We spent the next hour going through the technical assessment. Ruby's needs were indeed more complex than most. She wanted a system that would provide security without making her feel like she was living in a fortress. Smart locks that could be programmed for different access levels, cameras that would activate only when she was away, sensors that could distinguish between normal household activity and actual threats. It was while I was examining the existing wiring in her home office that it happened. Ruby had excused herself to take a phone call, and I was crouched behind her desk, tracing cable runs and checking connection points. When I stood up and turned around, she was standing in the doorway, having finished her call, watching me work. But something about the way the afternoon light was hitting her from behind, the graceful way she was leaning against the doorframe, the slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth, I just stopped and stared. Not in a creepy way, I told myself. Just appreciating. The way you might stop to really look at a piece of art in a museum, or a sunset that catches you off guard. Ruby Martinez at 50 was striking in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with presence, confidence, and an indefinable quality that made her impossible to ignore. She noticed, of course. How could she not? See something interesting, she asked, her voice holding that same note of amusement I'd heard when she first opened the door. I felt my face go red. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I was just... Ruby pushed off from the doorframe and walked toward me, her expression shifting to something more serious, more direct. She stopped about 3 feet away, close enough that I could smell her perfume. Something subtle and expensive that reminded me of gardens after rain. Joaquin, she said quietly, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. I nodded, not trusting my voice. At 50, do I still have it? The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. Her dark eyes held mine, and I could see vulnerability beneath the confidence. A genuine need to know, not fishing for compliments, but asking for truth. And then she did something that changed everything. She walked to her piano and sat down on the bench, her fingers finding the keys without hesitation. But she didn't play what I expected. Not the jazz piece I'd heard earlier or some classical exercise. Instead, she began a slow, haunting melody that I recognized after a few bars. The Way You Look Tonight. But this wasn't the standard lounge version you hear in elevators. Ruby played it with a complexity and emotion that transformed the familiar song into something completely new. Her left hand created a rich, walking bass line, while her right hand explored variations on the melody that I'd never heard before. She wasn't just playing the song, she was having a conversation with it. As she played, she looked directly at me, her question still hanging between us. At 50, do I still have it? But now I understood she wasn't just asking about physical attractiveness. She was asking about vitality, passion, the ability to move someone with her art, her presence, her entire being. I stood transfixed, my tablet forgotten in my hands, watching this woman pour herself into the music with an intensity that made the room feel smaller and larger at the same time. She played for maybe 3 minutes, building to a conclusion that left the final notes hanging in the air like a challenge. The silence that followed was profound. Ruby, I said finally, my voice rougher than I intended. You don't just still have it, you are it. She smiled then. Not the polite social smile I'd been getting all afternoon, but something real and unguarded that lit up her entire face. You know, Joaquin, that's the first time in about 5 years that someone has seen me, really seen me, as something other than a middle-aged woman trying to hang on to her youth. 5 years? I asked, settling into the chair across from the piano bench. What happened 5 years ago? Ruby's hands rested on the keys, but she didn't play. My divorce was finalized. 26 years of marriage to a man who, toward the end, looked at me like I was furniture he'd grown tired of. The kind of expensive furniture you keep because it's still functional, but you wouldn't choose it again if you were shopping today. The bitterness in her voice was sharp but not self-pitying, more like someone stating a fact about the weather. He left me for his assistant, which is so cliched. It's almost funny. 24 years old, blonde, the kind of woman who giggles at everything he says and makes him feel like the most fascinating man in the world. At first, I was devastated. Then I was angry. Now mostly, I'm grateful. Grateful for the wake-up call. I realized I'd spent the last decade of my marriage trying to be the woman I thought he wanted, instead of the woman I actually was. Making myself smaller, quieter, more convenient. When he left, I had to figure out who Ruby Martinez actually was when she wasn't trying to please someone else. She gestured around the room. This house, this music, the way I dress, the way I live. None of this would have been possible if I'd stayed married to Robert. He thought my playing was too loud, my decorating too bold, my personality too much. He sounds like an idiot, I said without thinking, then immediately worried I'd overstepped. But Ruby laughed, a genuine sound that made something in my chest unclench. He is, rather. But he's also the father of my daughter, and he wasn't always like that. Sometimes people just grow in different directions. He grew toward wanting someone who would reflect his idea of success back at him. I grew toward wanting to be authentic. And now I'm 50 years old, completely single for the first time since I was 22, living in this beautiful house with my piano and my books and my own thoughts for company. And most days, I love it. But sometimes, she trailed off, her fingers absently picking out a gentle melody. Sometimes, I prompted, sometimes I wonder if I've become so comfortable with my own company that I've forgotten how to connect with other people. If the confidence I've built is really just a sophisticated form of hiding. If the answer to Robert making me feel invisible is to make myself so self-contained that I become invisible by choice. The honesty of her admission hit me unexpectedly hard. Here was this accomplished, beautiful, clearly intelligent woman admitting to the same kinds of doubts that kept me awake at 3 a.m. Is that why you asked me about still having it? I asked. Because you're not sure if you're still visible? Ruby nodded slowly. I realize it's an unfair question to ask someone who's here to install cameras. But when I saw you looking at me, really looking, not just polite professional attention, I felt something I haven't felt in a long time. Seen. And I needed to know if that was real, or if I was projecting my own hopes onto a stranger's glance. I leaned forward in my chair, suddenly understanding that this conversation was important in a way that had nothing to do with security systems. Ruby, what you just did, that performance, was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. Not just heard, seen. You put yourself completely into that music, held nothing back. That takes incredible courage. Courage? To be that open, that vulnerable, with someone you barely know. To trust that they'll recognize what you're offering instead of judging it. Most people spend their whole lives afraid to show that much of themselves to anyone. Ruby was quiet for a long moment, her hands still resting on the keys. You know, Joaquin, I asked you here to upgrade my security system, but I'm starting to think what I really need isn't more protection from the world. Maybe what I need is help figuring out how to rejoin it. I set down my tablet completely, giving her my full attention. What do you mean? I mean, maybe the reason I've been feeling invisible isn't because I've lost it, whatever it is. Maybe it's because I've been hiding behind all this self-sufficiency, using my independence as another kind of wall. She stood up from the piano bench and moved to the window, looking out at her carefully maintained garden. When was the last time you took a real risk, Joaquin? Not a professional risk or a financial risk, but an emotional one? The question caught me off guard, but I found myself answering honestly. I don't think I ever have. I've spent most of my adult life trying to minimize variables, control outcomes. Even my relationships have been safe. Safe, Ruby repeated, turning back to face me. Yes, I know about safe. Safe is comfortable. Safe is predictable. Safe is also a slow death of everything that makes life worth living. She walked back to where I was sitting, but this time she didn't stop 3 feet away. She came close enough that I had to look up to meet her eyes, close enough that I could see the tiny lines around her eyes that spoke of years of laughter, and struggle, and growth. I have a proposition for you, Joaquin Parker. My heart started beating faster. What kind of proposition? The kind that has nothing to do with security systems and everything to do with two people who have been playing it safe for too long. What kind of proposition? I asked again, my voice barely above a whisper. Ruby smiled, but there was something different about it now. Less guardedness, more genuine excitement. I want to hire you for more than just a security system. I want to hire you to help me break out of my safe little world. I blinked, not sure I'd heard her correctly. I'm not sure I follow. Look, Joaquin, you seem like a good man. You're thoughtful, you actually listen when people talk, and you're clearly more intelligent than your job requires. But more importantly, you're safe enough that I trust you, and unfamiliar enough that you might actually be able to help me see myself differently. She moved to the window again, but this time she gestured for me to join her. Outside, her backyard was immaculate, a carefully designed space with mature trees, flower beds that showed thoughtful planning, and a small seating area that looked like it was rarely used. For the past 5 years, I've been rebuilding myself, she said. Learning who I am when I'm not trying to be someone else's idea of the perfect wife. And I've done good work. I'm stronger, more confident, more authentic than I've ever been. But I've also become very controlled. Very careful about who I let into my space. That doesn't sound like a bad thing, I said carefully. It's not, necessarily. But it's become another kind of prison. I have this beautiful house, financial security, interesting hobbies, a few close friends. On paper, my life looks perfect. But I haven't taken a real emotional risk in years. I haven't been spontaneous or vulnerable or alive in the way I was when I was younger. She turned to face me fully. When you looked at me earlier, really looked, I felt something I'd forgotten I was capable of feeling. Not just attractive, but electric. Like there was possibility in the air. I felt my heart start to race. Ruby, I'm not sure what you're asking me to do. I'm asking you to spend a week with me. Not romantically. I'm not trying to seduce you or create some kind of inappropriate situation. But I want you to help me remember what it feels like to be spontaneous. To say yes to things that scare me a little. To be seen by someone who doesn't have any preconceptions about who I should be. She paused, studying my expression. In exchange, I'll pay you your normal rate for the security installation, plus a bonus for your time. And maybe, if you're willing, I can help you figure out why a man with your obvious intelligence and capability is hiding behind the safety of routine work. The proposal was so unexpected, so far outside the bounds of any client relationship I'd ever had, that I found myself laughing. Not mocking laughter, but the kind that bubbles up when life takes a turn you never saw coming. You want to hire me as your what? Life coach? Adventure buddy? I want to hire you as my reminder that there's a bigger world out there than the one I've carefully constructed for myself, Ruby said seriously. And maybe you need the same reminder. I walked to her bookshelf, buying time to think. The titles were eclectic. Philosophy mixed with mystery novels, biographies of jazz musicians next to gardening guides, poetry collections that looked well read. It was the library of someone genuinely curious about the world. What would this week actually look like? I asked. I don't know exactly. That's part of the point. But I have some ideas. There's a jazz club downtown I've been wanting to visit but never had the courage to go alone. There's a pottery class I saw advertised that meets on Thursday evenings. I've always wanted to try rock climbing, or maybe take a cooking class focused on cuisines I've never attempted. She joined me at the bookshelf. The point isn't the specific activities. It's about saying yes to experiences that push me outside my comfort zone, and doing them with someone who might help me see myself through fresh eyes. And what makes you think I need the same thing? Ruby pulled a slim volume of poetry from the shelf. Pablo Neruda, well worn. Because when I asked you about taking emotional risks, you admitted you never have. Because you've been doing the same job for 8 years despite clearly being capable of much more. Because you have the look of someone who's been sleepwalking through his own life. Her directness should have offended me, but instead it felt like relief. Someone had finally said out loud what I'd been feeling but couldn't articulate. "This is crazy," I said. "Completely," Ruby agreed cheerfully. "But maybe that's exactly what we both need. A little bit of crazy to shake us out of our respective ruts." I looked around her beautiful, carefully controlled living space, then back at this woman who was offering to pay me to help her be spontaneous. It was the most unusual business proposition I'd ever received, and also somehow the most appealing. If I said yes, and I'm not saying I am, what would be the ground rules? Ruby's smile widened. Rule 1. We both have to say yes to at least one thing each day that scares us a little. Rule 2. Complete honesty about what we're thinking and feeling. Rule 3. No judgment about where this leads or doesn't lead. And Rule 4? I asked. Rule 4 is that we install your security system first, so at least one of us is getting what they originally came for. Despite everything, I found myself grinning. You know, this is the weirdest client meeting I've ever had. Good, Ruby said. Weird might be exactly what we need. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, weighing the most unusual decision of my life. Ruby waited patiently, her dark eyes holding mine without pressure, just genuine curiosity about what I would choose. "Okay," I said finally. "Yes, but we start with the security system." Ruby's face lit up with a smile that made me understand why she'd been a successful teacher. It was the kind of enthusiasm that made you want to learn whatever she was offering to teach. "Excellent. When can you start the installation?" "Tomorrow morning, if that works for you. It'll take about 3 days to do everything properly." "Perfect. That gives us the rest of this week for our experiment." We spent the next 2 hours going through the technical details of her security system. But the atmosphere had completely changed. Instead of a standard client consultation, it felt like planning a project with a partner. Ruby asked thoughtful questions about how different components would affect her daily routines, and I found myself suggesting creative solutions I'd never bothered to offer other clients. "What about the music room?" she asked as we reviewed the camera placement plan. "I don't want to feel like I'm being watched when I play." "Motion-activated system that disables when you're home," I suggested. "Plus, we can set up zones where cameras automatically turn away when they detect activity. Privacy when you need it, security when you don't. You can do that?" "Most installers don't offer it because it's more complicated to program, but it's not that difficult if you're willing to take the time." Ruby nodded approvingly. "See? This is exactly what I mean. You're capable of so much more than basic installations, but you've been hiding your skills behind what's easy and routine." As the afternoon wore on, I noticed Ruby becoming more animated, more engaged. She made coffee that was significantly better than anything I'd had in months, and we talked about everything from smart home automation to her years as a music teacher, to my own half-forgotten dreams of studying engineering. "What stopped you?" she asked when I mentioned my original college plans. "From pursuing engineering, I mean. Reality, I guess. My dad got hurt on a job site my sophomore year. Couldn't work for 8 months. I dropped out to help support the family, started doing electrical work myself, and just never went back. By the time things stabilized, I'd been out of school too long. It felt like the door had closed. But it hasn't, has it? You could still go back." I laughed, but not unkindly. "Ruby, I'm 34 years old. Starting over at this point would be what? Difficult? Expensive? What's the real reason you haven't even considered it?" Her directness was becoming familiar, but it still caught me off guard. "I don't know. Fear, maybe? I've got a good business, steady income. Going back to school would mean giving up everything I've built, or it could mean building something better." As we finished reviewing the installation plans, Ruby suggested we tackle our first risk together. "There's a farmer's market downtown that I've been wanting to visit. They have live music on Wednesday evenings, and I thought we could go listen, maybe get dinner at one of the food trucks." "That doesn't sound particularly risky," I said. "It is for me. I haven't been anywhere alone with a man who isn't my doctor or my accountant in over 3 years. And you?" I considered this. I can't remember the last time I did something social that wasn't planned at least a week in advance. "Perfect. We're both operating outside our comfort zones." The farmer's market was exactly the kind of place I would normally avoid. Crowded, unpredictable, full of people who seemed to be having more fun than I usually allowed myself. But walking through the stalls with Ruby, I found myself relaxing, in a way I hadn't in years. She had a gift for engaging with strangers that I envied. She complimented vendors on their produce, asked questions about growing techniques, and somehow managed to learn the life story of a woman selling handmade jewelry within 5 minutes of meeting her. "How do you do that?" I asked as we moved. "On to the next stall." "Do what?" "Connect with people so easily. That woman just told you about her divorce, her kids, her pottery hobby, and she seemed genuinely happy to share." Ruby selected a few apples from a display, chatting with the farmer about different varieties. "People want to be seen, Joaquin. Most of the time they're invisible to everyone around them. When you give someone your full attention, when you're genuinely curious about their story, they light up." She was right. I'd watched it happen 3 times already. Strangers becoming animated, more alive, simply because Ruby was genuinely interested in what they had to say. We found seats near the small stage where a local jazz trio was setting up. Ruby ordered fish tacos from a truck run by a couple who recognized her and welcomed her back like an old friend. I got a Korean BBQ sandwich from another vendor and discovered that food truck cuisine had evolved significantly since my last experience with it. "This is nice," I said as we settled in to listen to the music. "What specifically?" "I don't know. Being spontaneous, I guess. Not having every detail planned in advance." The trio started their first set, and I watched Ruby's face as she listened. She wasn't just hearing the music. She was analyzing it, appreciating the technical skill while also letting herself be moved by the emotion. It was the same intensity I'd seen when she played piano, but directed outward instead of inward. "They're good," she said during a pause between songs. "The bassist is especially talented. He's taking some interesting harmonic risks." "I have no idea what that means, but I trust your judgment." Ruby laughed. "That's rule number 5, by the way. Trust each other's expertise. You know technology, I know music. You understand systems, I understand people. Together, we might actually know enough to have some interesting adventures." As the evening progressed, I realized something had shifted. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about tomorrow's schedule or next week's deadlines. I was fully present, engaged with the moment and the person beside me, and Ruby seemed different too. Less guarded, more spontaneous. She applauded enthusiastically after each song, struck up a conversation with the couple sitting next to us, and even convinced me to request a song from the band. When we finally headed back to her car, the sun was setting and the market was winding down. "Day 1 accomplished," Ruby said with satisfaction. This was day 1? The first time in years either of us said yes to something unplanned. Tomorrow we raised the stakes a little. The next morning, I arrived at Ruby's house at 8 sharp, with a van full of equipment, and a head full of questions about what I'd gotten myself into. She greeted me at the door wearing paint-splattered jeans and an old concert t-shirt that somehow looked more elegant than most people's formal wear. "Ready to make my house smarter than I am?" she asked, leading me to the kitchen where she'd set up coffee and what looked like homemade pastries. "These look incredible," I said, accepting a cup of coffee that was, once again, significantly better than anything I made for myself. "Stress baking," Ruby admitted. "I stayed up until midnight, making cinnamon rolls because I was nervous about today." "Nervous about the installation?" "Nervous about yesterday. About what we agreed to do. About whether I've completely lost my mind." She sat down across from me at her kitchen table. "I haven't been this spontaneous since I was in my 20s, and I'm questioning every decision." I took a bite of cinnamon roll that was probably the best thing I'd eaten in months. "If it helps, I didn't sleep much either. I kept thinking about what you said yesterday, about sleepwalking through my own life. And I realized you were right. But I'm not sure I know how to wake up." Ruby studied my face with that direct gaze I was getting used to. "What scares you most about changing?" The question caught me off guard with its simplicity and its complexity. "Failure, I guess. I've built a life that works, even if it's not particularly exciting. What if I try something bigger and fall flat on my face?" "What? If you try something bigger and succeed? That might be even scarier." Ruby laughed, but not unkindly. "You know, Joaquin, I spent so many years afraid of disappointing my husband that I forgot to consider what would happen if I actually impressed myself. We spent the morning installing cameras and sensors, but our conversation continued as we worked. Ruby proved to be an excellent assistant. She anticipated what tools I needed, asked smart questions about the technology, and somehow managed to make running wire through walls feel like a collaborative art project. "Why security systems?" she asked, as I programmed the main control panel. "I mean, what drew you to this specific work? I'd never really thought about it before. I guess I like the idea of making people feel safe. There's something satisfying about leaving a house more secure than when you found it. But you said yesterday that sometimes you feel like you're helping people hide from the world." "Yeah, that's the paradox, isn't it? I'm in the business of building walls, but walls work both ways. They keep threats out, but they also keep life out." Ruby was quiet for a moment, testing the new keypad by the front door. "Is that what you think I'm doing? Building walls?" "I think we're both doing it. You with your perfect, controlled life. Me with my safe, predictable routine. The question is whether we're protecting ourselves or imprisoning ourselves." By noon, we'd completed the basic installation. The afternoon would be spent on programming and testing, but we decided to break for lunch. Ruby suggested we walk to a small cafe about 6 blocks away. Another small adventure for both of us. "I usually just eat whatever's in the fridge," she said as we strolled through her neighborhood. "Going out to lunch feels decadent." "When was the last time you did something decadent?" "I can't remember. That's probably the problem." The cafe was the kind of place I would have walked past without noticing. Small, locally owned, with mismatched furniture and art from local artists covering the walls. Ruby ordered a salad that came with ingredients I'd never heard of, and I got a sandwich that was far more complex than anything I would have chosen for myself. "Can I ask you something personal?" Ruby said as we waited for our food. "After yesterday, I think we're past the boundaries of normal personal questions. What happened with Jessica? Your ex-girlfriend who said you needed bigger dreams?" I winced slightly. I hadn't expected to be talking about Jessica, but I'd agreed to complete honesty. She wasn't wrong. We dated for 2 years, and she kept pushing me to take risks, apply for engineering programs, start a more ambitious business. I kept making excuses about timing and money and responsibility. And eventually she realized I wasn't making excuses about external circumstances. I was making excuses because I was afraid to want something more than what I had. Our food arrived, and I used the interruption to gather my thoughts. Jessica saw potential in me that I wasn't willing to see in myself. She got tired of dating someone who was more interested in playing it safe than playing to win. "Do you think she was right to leave?" "Yeah, I do. I wasn't the partner she deserved. I wasn't even the person I could have been." Ruby took a bite of her salad, considering. "What's different now?" "I don't know that anything is different. Maybe that's why I'm here with you, trying to figure out if I'm capable of change, or if I'm just going to keep making the same safe choices forever." "Well, for what it's worth, I think you're capable of much more than you believe. Yesterday, at the farmer's market, watching you engage with people, seeing you actually enjoy being spontaneous, that wasn't someone who's afraid of life. That was someone who just needed permission to live it." We ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, but I found myself studying Ruby's face. She seemed more relaxed today, less guarded than she'd been yesterday. But there was something else, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. "What about you?" I asked. "What are you most afraid of?" Ruby set down her fork and met my eyes. "That I've become so good at being alone that I've forgotten how to be with someone else. That I've built such a perfect life for one person that there's no room for anyone else in it." "Is that what you want? Room for someone else?" "I think so. But I'm 50 years old, Joaquin. I'm set in my ways, financially independent, used to making all my own decisions. What man my age wants to deal with that level of established personality? Maybe the question isn't what men your age want. Maybe the question is what you want." Ruby smiled, but there was sadness in it. "What I want is to feel alive again. Not just content, not just secure, but truly alive. The way I felt when I was younger and believed anything was possible. And do you think that's still possible? I don't know. But I'm hoping that's what this week will help us both figure out. That afternoon, as we finished programming the security system, Ruby made an announcement that changed everything. "I signed us up for something," she said, not meeting my eyes as she tested the new smart locks. "What kind of something?" "The kind that will either be completely liberating or completely humiliating. Possibly both." I stopped what I was doing with the control panel. "Ruby, what did you do?" She took a deep breath. "There's a community theater downtown that offers beginner improv classes. Tonight, 7 o'clock. I signed us up this morning while you were installing the backyard cameras. Improv? As in improv comedy, on stage, in front of people? Think of it as applied spontaneity," Ruby said with forced brightness. "We both agreed we needed to take risks that scare us." "Well, this terrifies me." I laughed, but it came out more like a groan. "Ruby, I've never been on stage in my life. I don't even like public speaking at neighborhood association meetings." "Perfect. Neither have I. We'll be equally bad together." "This is insane." "Yes, it is. But yesterday you said you'd never taken an emotional risk. Tonight, we're going to stand in front of strangers and make fools of ourselves with no script, no plan, and no safety net. If that's not an emotional risk, I don't know what is." Despite my terror, I found myself intrigued. "What made you think of improv?" Ruby sat down on her couch, suddenly looking vulnerable. "I've spent 5 years rebuilding myself, right? Learning to be confident, independent, self-sufficient. But I realized yesterday that I've become almost rehearsed. Like I know exactly who Ruby Martinez is and exactly how she behaves in every situation." She gestured toward the piano. "Even my music has become predictable. I play the same pieces the same way because I know I can do them well. I've created this beautiful, controlled life. But I've stopped surprising myself." "And you think improv will help with that?" "I think improv will force us both to react authentically in the moment, without time to overthink or prepare or protect ourselves. It's the opposite of everything we've both been doing." I considered this while finishing the system diagnostics. The security installation was nearly complete. Cameras positioned, sensors tested, everything integrated and functioning perfectly. It was good work, probably the most thorough installation I'd ever done. But Ruby was right. It was also exactly the kind of work I'd been doing for years. Safe, predictable, within my comfort zone. "Okay," I said finally. "But if I completely humiliate myself, you're paying for therapy." Ruby's face lit up. "Deal. But I have a feeling we're both going to surprise ourselves tonight." 3 hours later, we stood outside the Riverside Community Theater, a converted warehouse in the arts district that I'd driven past hundreds of times, but never entered. Through the large windows, we could see people milling around in what looked like a casual rehearsal space. "Last chance to run," Ruby said, but she was already moving toward the entrance. "Too late. I'm committed to this insanity." The class was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 12 people ranging in age from college students to retirees. The instructor, an energetic woman named Kenna who looked like she'd been doing theater her entire life, welcomed us with the kind of enthusiasm that made nervous people feel both better and worse. "Tonight we're going to work on saying yes," Kenna announced to the group. "In improv, the fundamental rule is yes, and whatever your scene partner gives you, you accept it and build on it. No denying, no blocking, no trying to control where the scene goes." The first exercise was simple. Standing in a circle, one person would make a statement, and the next person had to respond with yes, and then add something new. It sounded easy until it was my turn. "I can't believe we're finally opening that restaurant," the woman next to me said. My mind went completely blank. Everyone was looking at me. Ruby gave me an encouraging nod. "Yes, and the health inspector just showed up," I managed. "Yes, and he's actually my ex-boyfriend," the next person added. And suddenly we were building a story together. Each person, adding unexpected complications and details. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. When we moved on to actual scene work, I was paired with Ruby for our first exercise. Kenna gave us a simple setup. We were 2 people waiting for a bus. "Just start talking," Kenna said. "Let the scene develop naturally. Remember, there's no wrong choice as long as you're listening and responding honestly." Ruby and I stood facing each other in the makeshift performance space, with the rest of the class watching. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "This bus is really late," Ruby finally said. "Yes, and I'm starting to think it's not coming at all," I replied. "Yes, and that's a problem because I have a job interview in 20 minutes. "Yes, and I'm the person interviewing you." The class laughed, and suddenly we were off and running. The scene became about two people who discover they're connected in an unexpected way, then realize they're both hiding who they really are. Without planning it, we created characters who were vulnerable, funny, and surprisingly real. When Kenna called "scene," the class applauded, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The rush of creating something spontaneous and genuine with another person. "How did that feel?" Kenna asked. "Terrifying," I said honestly. "Alive," Ruby added. For the next hour, we did exercises that pushed us further out of our comfort zones. We played characters nothing like ourselves, told stories that we invented, on the spot, and learned to trust that our scene partners would catch us if we fell. During the final exercise, Ruby and I were paired again. This time, Kenna's instruction was simply, "Play yourselves, but tell each other one true thing you've never said out loud before." Ruby looked directly into my eyes. "I'm scared that I've become so independent that I don't know how to need anyone anymore." The honesty of her statement took my breath away. Without thinking, I responded with equal vulnerability. "I'm scared that I've been playing it so safe for so long that I don't remember what I actually want from life." The scene that followed wasn't comedy. It was two people being genuinely honest with each other in front of a room full of strangers. It was the most exposed I'd ever felt, and also the most connected. When class ended, we walked to the parking lot in contemplative silence. "That was," I started. "Completely outside anything I've ever done before," Ruby finished. "Are you glad we did it?" Ruby smiled, but it was different from her usual confident expression. This smile was uncertain, questioning, alive with possibility. "Ask me tomorrow," she said, "when I've had time to process what just happened in there." By Thursday morning, something fundamental had shifted between Ruby and me. When I arrived at her house to complete the final system testing, she greeted me with a confidence I hadn't seen before. Not the careful, controlled confidence she'd maintained all week, but something more natural and unguarded. "Good morning, partner in crime," she said, handing me coffee in a mug I hadn't seen before. "I have news." "What kind of news?" "The kind that proves we might actually be good influences on each other." She led me to her kitchen table where she'd spread out several brochures and printed emails. I spent half the night researching graduate programs in music therapy. I nearly choked on my coffee. Music therapy? It combines everything I love: music, teaching, helping people. But in a way I never explored because it seemed too risky. When I was married, Robert thought it was too touchy-feely to be a real career. She picked up one of the brochures. "There's a program at Cal State that's designed for career changers. I could start in the fall." "Ruby, that's incredible. What changed your mind?" "Tuesday night. Watching you create something genuine and spontaneous with me on that stage. I realized I've been so focused on being independent that I forgot about being purposeful." She paused, studying my reaction. "What about you? Have you thought any more about engineering school?" I had, actually. More than I'd expected. "I looked up some programs yesterday. Nothing definite, but there's a part-time engineering degree designed for working professionals. I could keep the business running while I study. And I'm terrified, but also more excited about something than I've been in years." Ruby beamed. "See? We're both capable of wanting more than we thought we were." We spent the morning completing the security system installation, but the mood was celebratory rather than routine. Every component we tested worked perfectly. The smart home integration exceeded Ruby's expectations, and I found myself genuinely proud of the work we'd accomplished together. "This is incredible, Joaquin," Ruby said as we ran through the final system check. "It's exactly what I wanted. Security without feeling imprisoned." "It's some of my best work," I admitted. Having someone genuinely interested in the process made all the difference. That afternoon, Ruby suggested we celebrate our mutual breakthroughs with something she'd been wanting to try: A painting class at a local art studio. Nothing too ambitious, she said. Just watercolors and wine, and seeing what happens when we stop overthinking. The class was perfect. Small, relaxed, led by an instructor who emphasized exploration over technique. Ruby approached painting with the same musical sensibility she brought to everything else, creating flowing compositions that somehow captured movement and emotion. I discovered I had a decent eye for color and detail, probably from years of technical work requiring precision. "You're both naturals," the instructor, Mega, commented as she reviewed our work. "Have either of you considered taking this further?" Ruby and I looked at each other and started laughing. "We're in the middle of discovering we're capable of a lot more than we thought," Ruby explained. As we cleaned our brushes and compared our paintings, I realized something had happened that I hadn't expected. We'd become genuine friends, not just two people helping each other take risks, but two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company and brought out the best in each other. "Thank you," I said as we packed up our art supplies. "For what?" "For seeing potential in me that I'd forgotten existed, for pushing me to want more than safe and predictable." Ruby smiled, but there was something bittersweet in her expression. "You know, Joaquin, this week has been amazing, but I keep wondering what happens when it's over." The question hung between us as we walked to our cars, and I realized I'd been avoiding thinking about it too. What did happen when the week was over? "I don't know," I said honestly. "I guess we go back to our regular lives, except maybe they won't feel so regular anymore." "Maybe," Ruby said, but she sounded uncertain. "Or maybe this was just a beautiful bubble that pops when we return to reality." That night, I lay awake thinking about Ruby's words. In 4 days, we'd created something extraordinary together. Not romantic love exactly, but something deeper. A friendship that had catalyzed change in both of us. But friendships like this, built on such intensity and mutual discovery, were fragile things. What happened when the artificial structure of our week of risks was gone? The next morning brought an unexpected complication. I arrived at Ruby's house to find her sister Joan's car in the driveway. Ruby met me at the door with an apologetic expression. "Fair warning, my sister showed up unannounced. She has opinions about my recent behavior." Joan Martinez Walsh was everything Ruby wasn't. Sharp-edged where Ruby was warm, suspicious where Ruby was trusting, practical where Ruby was artistic. She stood in the kitchen wearing an expensive business suit and the expression of someone who'd discovered a problem that needed immediate fixing. "You must be the handyman," Joan said without warmth. "Ruby's told me about your arrangement." "Joan," Ruby warned. "What arrangement?" I asked, looking between the sisters. Joan's smile was thin. "Oh, she hasn't told you?" Ruby's going through what I like to call her midlife crisis phase. Every few years since her divorce, she finds some project to throw herself into. Last year it was learning Italian. Before that, it was training for a marathon she never ran. "Joan, stop. This week it's been playing adventurous with the security installer. Very exciting, I'm sure, but hardly sustainable." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Is that what this is, Ruby? A phase?" Ruby's face had gone pale. "Joaquin, it's not—" "Of course it is," Joan interrupted. "Look, you seem like a nice enough man, but my sister has a pattern. She gets bored with her perfectly good life, creates some dramatic project to feel alive again, and then when reality sets in, she retreats back to her safe little world. It's nothing personal." The silence that followed was devastating. I could see Ruby struggling to find words, but Joan's assessment had the ring of familiarity to it. The expression on Ruby's face wasn't denial. It was recognition. "I should go," I said quietly. "Joaquin, wait," Ruby started, but I was already moving toward the door. "The system is fully installed and tested. You have my number if you need technical support." I was in my van and driving away before Ruby could follow me outside. In my rearview mirror, I saw her standing in her doorway, Joan beside her. And I realized how the scene must look to her sister. Ruby chasing after the latest in a series of temporary distractions from her real life. For the rest of the day, I threw myself into routine work. I had 2 simple installations scheduled, basic residential systems that required no creativity, no innovation, no emotional investment. The familiar rhythms of running cable and programming keypads should have been comforting, but instead, they Felt like a prison I was voluntarily walking back into. Ruby called twice. I didn't answer. By evening, I was sitting in my apartment, staring at the engineering program information I'd printed out earlier in the week. Joan's words echoed in my head. Hardly sustainable. Maybe she was right. Maybe the whole week had been an elaborate fantasy, two people playing at being different than they really were. My phone buzzed with a text from Ruby. Please let me explain. Joan doesn't understand what this week meant to either of us. But maybe Joan understood perfectly. Maybe she'd seen her sister go through this cycle enough times to recognize it. And maybe I'd been foolish enough to believe that someone like Ruby Martinez could genuinely see potential in someone like me. Looked around my Spartan apartment. Functional furniture, no art on the walls, everything designed for efficiency rather than beauty. This was my real life. Safe, predictable, exactly what Joan had accused me of being. A temporary distraction from Ruby's real world. Another text arrived. You changed my life this week, Joaquin. Don't let Joan's cynicism undo that. But as I read her words, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe Joan's cynicism was just another word for experience. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. I'd spent the night alternating between anger at Joan's interference and doubt about everything Ruby and I had built together. By dawn, I'd convinced myself that Joan was probably right. I'd been a temporary distraction in Ruby's pattern of searching for excitement. I was loading equipment into my van for a routine service call when Ruby's car pulled into my driveway. She got out slowly, looking like she hadn't slept either. She wore simple jeans and a sweater, no makeup, her hair pulled back carelessly. It was the first time I'd seen her look anything less than composed, and somehow that made her more beautiful, not less. We need to talk, she said simply. I don't think there's much to say. Your sister made things pretty clear. My sister, Ruby said with unusual sharpness, doesn't know everything about my life, and she certainly doesn't know anything about what this week has meant to me. I stopped loading equipment and looked at her properly. There was something different in her posture, less of the careful confidence I'd grown used to, more raw, determination. Joan wasn't entirely wrong, though, was she? I said. About the pattern? Ruby was quiet for a long moment. No, she wasn't entirely wrong. I have done this before, thrown myself into projects and people when I felt restless or unfulfilled. But Joaquin, this isn't that. How do you know? Because those other times, I was trying to change something external to fix something internal. I was trying to find myself through activities or causes, or even people. This week, I wasn't trying to find myself. I already knew who I was. I was trying to share that person with someone else. She stepped closer, and I could see the exhaustion in her eyes, but also something else. A clarity that hadn't been there before. After Joan left yesterday, I did something I've never done before. I called my ex-husband. That surprised me. Robert, why? Because I needed to understand something. I asked him if he thought I was the kind of person who used people as distractions from my real problems. And what did he say? Ruby's smile was rueful. He said that was exactly what I used to do. That throughout our marriage, whenever I was unhappy, I'd find some new interest or hobby or project instead of addressing what was actually wrong between us. My heart sank. This was exactly what I'd been afraid of. But then, Ruby continued, I asked him if he thought I was capable of change. If he thought the person I'd become since our divorce was fundamentally different from the person I was when we were married. And he said yes. He said the Ruby he'd been married to was always trying to become someone else. But the Ruby he's seen these past few years knows exactly who she is and isn't apologizing for it. I leaned against my van, processing this. What does that have to do with us? Everything, Joaquin. Because this week wasn't about me trying to become someone different. It was about me being exactly who I am with someone who saw that person and valued her. She moved closer still, close enough that I could see the sincerity in her dark eyes. Joan thinks you're a phase because she's never seen me be completely myself with another person. She's used to seeing me perform, adapt, try to fit into someone else's vision of who I should be. But with you, I never had to do that. Ruby, I'm not finished. You asked me yesterday what happens when this week is over. Here's what I think. Nothing has to be over unless we decide it is. We don't have to go back to being the people we were before we met each other. The rain was starting to fall harder, but neither of us moved toward shelter. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe the most important risk we've taken this week isn't improv or painting or any of the activities we've done together. Maybe it's allowing ourselves to believe that we deserve more than safe and predictable, that we deserve connection, growth, possibility. 6 months later, I sat in a lecture hall at Cal State, taking notes on structural engineering principles, while Ruby sat 3 rows behind me in her own graduate program. We'd driven to campus together that morning, as we did most days, sharing coffee and conversation about our respective coursework. The changes in our lives had been gradual but profound. Ruby had been accepted into the music therapy program and threw herself into her studies with the same passion she brought to everything else. I'd been admitted to the part-time engineering degree and discovered that going back to school at 34 was challenging but not impossible. More importantly, we'd both learned to live with uncertainty. Our relationship had evolved into something neither of us had quite expected. Deeper than friendship, but not confined by traditional romantic definitions. We were partners in the truest sense. 2 people committed to supporting each other's growth even when we couldn't predict exactly where that growth would lead. Ruby's house had become our shared space, though I'd kept my apartment as a workshop for the security business, which I was gradually transitioning to focus on more complex commercial installations. The increased challenge and income allowed me to reduce my hours and focus on my studies. "How was class?" Ruby asked as we met outside the engineering building after my afternoon lab. "Exhausting. Exhilarating. I can't believe I waited this long to do this. And I can't believe I spent so many years thinking it was too late to start. Over." She linked her arm through mine as we walked toward the parking lot. "Did I tell you about my practicum placement? The children's hospital? They confirmed it this morning. I'll be working with kids who are dealing with trauma and chronic illness, using music to help them process their experiences." I stopped, walking, and turned to face her. "Ruby, that's incredible. You're going to be amazing at that." Her smile was radiant, but also peaceful in a way I'd never seen before. "I think I might be. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing exactly what I'm meant to do." As we drove home, I reflected on how much had changed since that Tuesday, when I'd arrived at her house to install a security system. We'd both taken enormous risks, financial, emotional, professional, and we'd both discovered capabilities we'd forgotten we had. Joan had eventually come around, though it took several months of seeing Ruby's genuine happiness before she stopped predicting disaster. "I've never seen you this settled," she'd admitted during a recent visit. "Not calm exactly, but purposeful." That evening, as Ruby practiced piano and I worked on homework at her kitchen table, I realized this was what contentment felt like. Not the absence of challenge or uncertainty, but the presence of meaning and connection. We were both works in progress, but we were progressing together. "Joaquin," Ruby called from the piano. "Come here for a minute." I found her sitting at the bench with sheet music I didn't recognize. "What is it?" "Something I've been working on. A piece about transformation. About 2 people who help each other remember who they were meant to be." She began to play, and the melody was unlike anything I'd heard from her before. Complex but accessible. Challenging but beautiful. It told a story without words, capturing something essential about growth, risk, and the courage to change. When she finished, she looked up at me with that direct gaze I'd fallen in love with from the very beginning. "At 51, she said with a smile, "I definitely still have it, and so do you. And up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us."